It started with a brutal sentence on the side of Interstate 95. "Take the bus. Bentleys don't carry failures," Dad said. At graduation, the dean announced, "And now, our youngest billionaire." My parents dropped their phones. But before the applause and the shock, before security dragged my screaming father out, gravel crunched under my dress shoes. I stood on the shoulder, wearing my cap and gown, staring at the man who gave me life, and realized he didn't know me at all. The Bentley's cabin smelled of lavender and expensive leather, a sharp contrast to the humid afternoon air that felt like a wet wool blanket. Trucks roared past, shaking the ground beneath my scuffed dress shoes. My father didn't look at me. He kept his eyes fixed on the dashboard clock, tapping the steering wheel with an impatient rhythm. He wasn't angry that he was abandoning his son on the highway. He was simply annoyed that this logistical stop was taking longer than 20 seconds. "Close the door," he commanded. My seat was now occupied by a violent orange Hermes box. It was a gift for my brother, Troy, who had barely scraped the passing GPA. The box was apparently too delicate for the trunk, unlike my dignity. I looked at my mother in the passenger seat. She was applying fresh lipstick in the vanity mirror, carefully outlining her lips in ruby red. She never turned her head. To them, I was just excess cargo displaced by something they loved. I slammed the heavy door, a solid, expensive thud sealing me out. My father leaned across the seat. "Bentleys don't carry failures." He didn't wait for me to step back. He floored the accelerator. Tires screeching before the all-wheel drive caught the pavement. The Bentley shot forward, weaving into the fast lane. A cloud of exhaust and road dust washed over me, coating my black gown in a fine gray film. I watched the taillights disappear. I didn't cry. Tears imply surprise or betrayal, and honestly, I had expected this exact outcome for years. A semi-truck blared its horn, reminding me I was a pedestrian in a place designed for machines. I stepped onto the grass and pulled out my phone. Any normal student would be frantically checking the bus schedule or calling a friend. I wasn't normal. I opened my secure email folder, bypassing the family group chat where Troy was posting selfies. My finger hovered over the refresh button. I wasn't looking for a ride. I was waiting for confirmation that the wire transfer had finally cleared. The confirmation hit my inbox as the city bus rattled to a halt. The brakes squealed like a dying animal. I climbed aboard, swiping my student ID with a steady hand. The interior smelled of old rain and diesel fuel, a sharp shift from the lavender leather I had left. I sat in the back, surrounded by strangers who saw a kid in a mortarboard and assumed I was broke. They were wrong. I wasn't a victim, I was a predator in waiting. The bus lurched forward, throwing me against a plastic seat that felt greasy to the touch. The air conditioning was broken, replaced by the suffocating heat of 40 bodies pressed too close. I gathered my graduation gown tight around my waist, slept, avoiding the sticky floor. It was a sharp contrast to the climate-controlled silence of the Bentley currently speeding toward the stadium. My father was likely listening to jazz, unbothered by the fact he had discarded his son like a used wrapper. Across the aisle, a woman with tired eyes stared at my mortarboard. She probably saw a student drowning in debt, crying on public transit, before facing the real world. She offered a sympathetic, wary smile, a silent camaraderie of the broke. She didn't know I wasn't checking my bank account to see if I could afford dinner. I was staring at a spreadsheet that would make the GDP of a small island nation look like change. Perception is a dangerous thing. My phone buzzed, vibrating against my palm like an angry hornet. It was a notification from Family First, our group chat. A photo loaded slowly over the bus's spotty data connection. It showed Troy in the front passenger seat, holding a crystal flute of champagne. The orange Hermes box sat prominently on his lap, taking up the space where I should have been. The caption read, "Finally got rid of the extra weight. Graduation vibes only." My mother had hearted the image. I stared at the screen, waiting for the hurt to arrive. I had spent years making excuses for them, telling myself they were just stressed or busy. But looking at Troy's smug grin, the truth finally clicked into place. This wasn't an accident or a scheduling conflict. It was a humiliation ritual. They didn't leave me on the highway because they had to. My struggle was the battery that powered their shine. They needed me beneath them to feel rich. That realization didn't break my heart. It stopped it. The desperate part of me that still craved their approval died somewhere between exit 4 and exit 5. A cold, clinical clarity settled over my mind, freezing the tears before they could fall. I wasn't their son anymore. I was an observer analyzing a failed business partnership. The woman who hearted that photo wasn't my mother. She was a liability I was about to liquidate. I wiped my face, feeling nothing but focus. I minimized the photo and unlocked my secure folder. I wasn't looking at family memories. I was looking at the final confirmation email from the Federal Regulatory Commission. The merger was approved. My AI infrastructure company, built in silence while living in a studio, had been acquired. The wire transfer was scheduled for this afternoon. $1.2 billion. I looked down at Rest's scuffed heels. My parents thought they were punishing a failure. They had no idea they were currently ghosting a billionaire. The bus hissed to a stop 3 blocks from the stadium. I stepped off, smoothing the wrinkles from my gown. Let them have their champagne. Slept. Let them have their Bentley. They were celebrating a depreciating asset, while I held the keys to the kingdom. They treated the most powerful person in their bloodline like a stray dog, completely unaware the power dynamic had already flipped. I walked toward the arena, not as a victim, but as a man bringing a war. The stadium hummed with the energy of 20,000 people. A sea of black gowns and eager parents. I scanned the crowd as I walked toward the staging area, my eyes locking onto the VIP section. It was a roped-off heaven with plush seating and shade, reserved for major donors and university trustees. Naturally, that was where my family sat. They didn't have tickets for that section. They didn't even have tickets for the floor. But rules never applied to Richard. They had clearly bullied their way past a student usher, likely claiming my father was a prospective donor. They occupied the front row, but they weren't watching the ceremony. They were filming Troy. My brother posed with a stolen program, his back turned to the podium, checking his angles in the selfie camera. My parents hovered around him like makeup artists on a set, adjusting his tie. They were so busy curating their image, they didn't notice the dean stepping up. "Ladies and gentlemen." The dean's voice boomed across the stadium speakers, silencing the murmur of the crowd. "Today is a historic day for our university. We often speak of potential, but rarely do we see it realized so spectacularly within our own halls." My parents didn't look up. My mother was busy fixing a smudge on Troy's cheek. They were in their own bubble of narcissism, completely immune to the world around them. They had no idea the bubble was about to burst. "It is my distinct honor," the dean continued, "to introduce our valedictorian. But he is more than a student. As of this afternoon, following a landmark acquisition of his AI infrastructure firm, He has officially become the youngest self-made billionaire in history. The word billionaire hit the crowd like a physical wave. A hush fell over the stadium, followed by a low, buzzing murmur. That word finally got my father's attention. He looked up, confused, his greed radar suddenly pinging. "Please welcome," the dean shouted. "Barry!" The giant screens flanking the stage cut to a live feed of my face. I saw my parents freeze in the VP box. I saw the blood drain from my mother's face, leaving her pale beneath her spray tan. I saw Troy drop his phone, his mouth hanging open for 5 seconds. They just stared at the Jumbotron, processing the impossible reality. The son they left on the highway wasn't a failure. He was the prize. Then the switch flipped. They didn't look ashamed. They didn't look sorry. They looked ravenous. My father jumped the velvet rope of the VIP section. My mother grabbed Troy, and they sprinted toward the stage. It was a display of pure, unfiltered entitlement. They pushed past security guards, waving their arms and screaming over the applause. "That's my son," my father bellowed, his voice cracking. "That's my boy! We raised him! Let us through!" They scrambled up the stairs, panting. I didn't step back to hug them. I stepped forward to the microphone, my voice amplified to decibels that shook the bleachers. I spoke with the icy calm of a CEO firing an incompetent employee. "Security," I said, my voice echoing off the stadium walls. "Please remove these fans. I don't know who they are. They are trespassing." The crowd went silent as 3 large men grabbed my father. He looked at me, shocked. As the grip of consequence finally tightened. The adrenaline from the stadium faded the moment I unlocked the deadbolt to my apartment. It was a studio the size of a walk-in closet, smelling faintly of lemon cleaner and instant noodles. This was where the billionaire lived. I kicked off my dress shoes, enjoying the silence that replaced the roar of the crowd. My phone had been vibrating non-stop for 2 hours. Slept. A relentless stream of unknown numbers and desperate voicemails. I didn't check them. I walked to the single window. People always asked why I hid the money. They assumed I was stingy or paranoid, but they didn't understand the survival mechanics of my childhood home. Financial transparency was a death sentence in the house of Richard. I learned to hide my assets when I was 16. I needed braces because my teeth were crowding so badly it kept me awake at night. My father told me dental work was cosmetic and not in the budget. 2 weeks later, he bought Troy a pony. I didn't argue or beg. I got a job at a warehouse, stacking pallets until my hands bled. I saved every pen in a hollowed-out biology textbook and paid the orthodontist in crumpled cash. They thought they were teaching me humility by making me fund my own health care while they funded Troy's unlimited credit card for sushi emergencies. They didn't realize they were teaching me the most valuable lesson of my life. Never let the enemy see your ledger. Silence is the only shield. That lesson built this apartment. It looked like poverty, but it was actually camouflage. Under the floorboards, figuratively speaking, lay patents worth 9 figures. I walked to the kitchenette and poured a glass of tap water. The luxury I could afford now. The penthouses, the yachts, the staff, felt alien. I preferred this fortress. It was the only place where I wasn't an option or an accessory. But I knew the peace wouldn't last. The sharks had smelled blood in the water. My intercom buzzed, shattering the quiet. It wasn't the lobby guard, it was my personal assistant, Sarah, whom I had stationed downstairs. "They're here, Barry," she said, her voice tight with professional concern. "3 individuals claiming to be your parents. Security is on standby to remove them." I looked at the grain of the cheap laminate counter. I could send them away. I could get a restraining order tonight and never see their faces again. But that felt too easy. Send them up, I said. Let's get this over with. I didn't want safety. I wanted closure. I wanted to see the look in their eyes when they realized the scale of their mistake. I sat on my futon, the only piece of furniture I owned, and waited. I expected apologies. I expected tears, begging. Maybe a performative speech about how they had lost their way. I underestimated their narcissism. I forgot that to them, I was just a broken ATM. Heavy footsteps pounded down the hallway. They didn't knock. My father hammered on the wood like he was serving a warrant. When I opened the door, they didn't look remorseful. They looked like they were here to collect a debt. Richard marched in first, red-faced and sweating, slamming a leather portfolio onto my small dining table. My mother followed, sniffing delicately behind oversized sunglasses. They didn't see a son. They saw an unruly employee who needed to be disciplined for making a scene. You have caused this family a tremendous amount of pain. Richard started, bypassing hello entirely. Do you have any idea how embarrassing that stunt was? He paced my small living room, his expensive Italian suit looking ridiculous against the peeling paint of my rental. Troy trailed behind him. Phone raised, live streaming to his followers. Meeting with investors. He muttered to the screen, adjusting his hair in the viewfinder. Big things coming. My mother dusted off a plastic chair before sitting, looking at me like I was a stain. Slept. You looked like monsters because the cameras were high definition, I said, leaning back in my squeaky office chair. I just provided the lighting. Richard ignored me and tapped the leather portfolio he had slammed on the table. Reparations are in order. You humiliated your brother on what should have been his weekend. You owe him. He opened the folder. It wasn't an apology letter. It was a proposal. Troy is launching a lifestyle brand. He needs seed capital. $5 million. It is a drop in the bucket for you now, my mother added. And it will go a long way toward healing the rift you caused. I looked at the papers. It was 10 pages of photos of Troy holding protein shakes and standing next to cars he didn't own. No business plan, no revenue model. Just pure entitlement printed on glossy paper. You want me to invest in this? I asked, my voice flat. We want you to support your family. Richard corrected. Consider it a tax write-off. Troy chimed in, finally looking up from his stream since I was ruining his vibe. And a way to buy your way back into our good graces. They truly believed they still held the cards. They thought my money was just a new resource for them to strip mine, exactly like they had mined myself, esteem for 20 years. They didn't see a CEO. They saw a piggy bank that had finally learned how to open itself. I stared at Richard. I will consider it, I said. The room went still. Greed flickered in my father's eyes, replacing the anger. But I need full access to the family financials. If I am investing in the brand, I need to know the parent company is solvent. Richard hesitated, his hand hovering over the portfolio. That is private. That is the deal, I replied, sliding the folder back. All the books are no check. Just business. You taught me that. Richard looked at my mother. She gave a barely perceptible nod. They were desperate. I could smell the insolvency on them like cheap cologne. Fine, Richard said, pulling a silver flash drive from his pocket. Our accountant prepared everything for a bank loan we decided not to take. He tossed the drive onto the table. He didn't realize he had just handed me the murder weapon. He thought he was closing a deal. He was actually signing his own confession. We expect the transfer by morning. Richard said, buttoning his jacket. They swept out of the apartment with the same arrogance they entered with. Slept, leaving the door wide open. I didn't close it immediately. I stared at the silver flash drive sitting on the scratched table. It looked innocent, just a piece of plastic and metal. But inside, I knew I would find the rot. I picked it up. It was heavy. I plugged it into my laptop and started the hunt. I didn't rely on my own eyes alone. I uploaded the drive's contents to a secure server and conferenced in my lead auditor, Marcus. Within an hour, 3 forensic accountants stripped the data down to its binary bones. My apartment became a command center. Monitors glowed with spreadsheets, illuminating the peeling wallpaper. We weren't looking for bad math, we were looking for intent. Richard thought he handed me a sanitized summary, but metadata never lies. Every deleted column left a ghost behind. The hunt for the rot had officially begun. The first pass revealed a financial hemorrhage that was almost impressive in its stupidity. My parents were drowning. The portfolio Richard slammed down was a facade masking millions in debt. They were leveraging credit cards to pay mortgages on investment properties that sat empty. The success they flaunted was built on a foundation of high-interest loans and panicked transfers. They were bleeding cash to maintain the image of wealth, terrified that the world might see the cracks. It wasn't just mismanagement, it was a desperate, flailing panic. Look at the education trust, Marcus said through the speaker, his voice tight. My stomach turned. My grandmother established that trust for tuition. I never touched it, assuming it was empty, because Richard claimed the market crash wiped it out. I opened the ledger for the UTMA account. It hadn't been wiped out by the market. It was drained systematically. One transaction stood out like a fresh wound. 3 weeks ago, a withdrawal of $300,000 hit the account, leaving a flat balance of 0. I traced the routing number. The money didn't go to a university or a hospital. It went directly to Prestige Motoring, the dealership where the Bentley was purchased. The date aligned perfectly with Troy's Instagram post. Rage, cold and sharp, flooded my chest. Richard hadn't just favored Troy. He had stolen my inheritance to buy him a toy. This wasn't just bad parenting anymore. This was a felony. As custodian, he had a fiduciary duty. He had violated it to buy a pink car. Pull the trust bylaws, I ordered. Marcus was ahead of me. Section 4, paragraph B, he recited. The bad actor clause. My grandmother was a paranoid woman, and for once, I thanked her for it. The clause stated that if the custodian defrauded the beneficiary, assets purchased with stolen funds immediately became the property of the victim. That Bentley wasn't Richard's. It wasn't Troy's. Legally, that $300,000 pink monstrosity belonged to me. They were driving my property while telling me to take the bus. We didn't stop at the car. We kept digging into the real estate. The penthouse, the crown jewel, was in trouble. They had missed 3 mortgage payments. The bank was preparing to foreclose, but Richard had been stalling them with promises of a big liquidity event. Likely me. The note is distressed, Marcus noted. The bank would sell it for 90 cents on the dollar just to get it off their books. I didn't hesitate. Buy it, I said. Buy the whole loan. Tonight. The wire transfer took 10 minutes. By 2 a.m., my shell company became the legal owner of my parents' mortgage. I wasn't just their son anymore. I was their landlord, their creditor, and their victim. The power dynamic hadn't just shifted, it had inverted completely. I held the deed to their roof and the title to their car. They were sleeping in a home they no longer owned, dreaming of spending my money. unaware that I had just bought their entire existence out from under them. I could have sued them. I could have dragged this out in court for years. But that was too slow. I wanted immediate, kinetic justice. I wanted them to feel the same sudden displacement I felt on the side of the highway. Prepare the eviction notice, I told Marcus. And call the repossession team. I want the car picked up tomorrow at noon. Marcus paused. That's aggressive, Barry. Are you sure? I looked at the photo of Troy again. I am sure. I spent the rest of the night drafting the necessary affidavits. It was a cold, mechanical process. I felt like a surgeon removing a tumor that shared my DNA. There was no guilt. Only the satisfaction of balancing an equation that had been uneven for decades. I printed the documents on crisp, heavy bond paper. The weight felt good. These weren't just legal forms, they were instruments of war. I placed them in a briefcase next to the flash drive. The trap was set. Sunlight broke over the city skyline, painting my apartment gray. I hadn't slept, but I wasn't tired. I was energized by the collision of truth and delusion. I showered, shaved, and put on my graduation suit. It was the only formal wear I had. But today, it felt like armor. I checked my phone. One text from Richard. Did you send the wire? I smiled for the first time in days. On my way, I replied. I wasn't bringing a check. I arrived at the penthouse garage exactly at high noon. The sun was blinding, reflecting off the polished concrete of the driveway. My parents weren't waiting for me with a thank you card or a warm lunch. They were busy being stars in their own production. Troy was leaning against the pink Bentley, holding his phone at arm's length, live, streaming to his followers. Manifestation is real. Guys, he told the camera, flashing a watch he likely bought on credit. Richard stood nearby, nodding approvingly at the spectacle. They looked like royalty in a castle made of sand. The rumble of a heavy diesel engine shattered their photo shoot. A massive flatbed truck backed into the driveway, its backup alarm beeping with rhythmic insolence. Richard's head snapped around, his eyes narrowing behind his sunglasses. He looked at the truck, then at me, confusion clouding his face. What is this? He demanded, stepping in front of the Bentley as if his tailored suit could stop a 5-ton vehicle. You ordered a service vehicle during a shoot. The tow driver, a burly man named Sal, hopped out, holding a clipboard. Get that thing out of here! Richard shouted, pointing a shaking finger at the street. This is private property. You are disrupting a media event. Sal ignored him, walking toward the winch controls with practiced indifference. I stepped forward, holding the briefcase that contained their demise. Actually, I said, my voice cutting through his shouting. He is right on schedule. Troy lowered his phone but didn't stop recording. The stream was capturing real-time drama, and his view count was climbing. He loved attention, but he didn't realize he was broadcasting his own funeral. Richard stormed toward me, invading my personal space. You called a tow truck. Have you lost your mind? We are waiting for the wire transfer. I opened the briefcase and pulled out the single sheet of paper that mattered. There is no wire transfer, I said. But there is this. I handed him the bank trace. You stole $300,000 from my education trust. You violated your fiduciary duty as custodian. Richard froze. He looked at the document, his face draining of color. The legal term hung in the air like smoke. A squad car pulled up behind the tow truck, lights flashing silently. 2 officers stepped out, hands resting near their belts. Richard looked for an ally, but their faces were stone. This is a civil matter, he sputtered, trying to pivot. It is grand larceny, I corrected. But I am generous. I am just reclaiming my property. I showed the officers the trust deed and the bad actor clause. The vehicle was purchased with stolen funds. Legally, title reverts to the victim. That means me. The lead officer nodded, signaling Sal to proceed. Sal didn't waste time. He hooked the chains to the Bentley's undercarriage. The winch whined, the cable pulling taut with a metallic groan. Troy screamed. Actually screamed, dropping his phone. "My car! You can't take my car!" He lunged for the door handle, but the officer caught him by the shoulder. "Step back, son," the cop warned. The pink chassis lifted off the pavement, tilting awkwardly into the air. The symbol of their status was dangling like a dead fish. The live stream comments were scrolling fast, laughing at the repo. Richard turned on me, his eyes bulging. "You ungrateful little leech! I will sue you into the ground! Get off my driveway!" I reached back into the briefcase. "It is not your driveway," I said softly. I handed him the second document, the foreclosure notice, and the transfer of deed. "You missed 3 payments. The bank sold the note last night to a holding company." I paused, letting him read the name of the LLC. "I own the building, Richard. And I am evicting you." The silence was absolute. My mother walked out of the elevator just in time to hear the news. She looked from the suspended Bentley to the foreclosure notice in Richard's trembling hand. "You can't do this," she whispered, clutching her pearls. "We have nowhere to go." "You have 60 minutes, I replied, checking my watch. "After that, I change the locks, and the police remove you for trespassing." It was brutal, but it was fair. They had kicked me out of a car on the highway. I was kicking them out of a lifestyle. They didn't pack clothes, they packed jewelry and electronics. They ran around the penthouse like rats on a sinking ship, shoving valuables into designer duffel bags. I stood by the door, watching the clock. At 59 minutes, they emerged, looking disheveled and smaller than I had ever seen them. Richard tried to stare me down, but he couldn't hold my gaze. He was a king without a castle. They walked past me toward the street, not the garage. They didn't have a car anymore. They had to hail a taxi. A yellow cab pulled up, its brakes squeaking. A sound remarkably similar to the bus I had ridden yesterday. The driver popped the trunk, annoyed by their luggage. As Richard reached for the door handle, he looked back at me one last time, waiting for me to brake, to offer a hotel, to save him. I didn't. I leaned against the doorframe of my new property and delivered the line that would haunt him forever. "Penthouses don't carry failures," I said. "Take the cab." I closed the door, sealing the vault. The yellow cab disappeared into the flow of traffic. I didn't watch it go. I pulled out my phone and opened the contact list. My thumb hovered over Dad, Mom, and Troy. For years, these names had induced anxiety, a Pavlovian response to pain and disappointment. Today, they were just data points to be deleted. I tapped block contact for each one. The digital wall was up, stronger than any gate I could install. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy with relief. I turned back toward the penthouse elevator, swiping my keycard. The ride up was smooth, devoid of the usual tension that accompanied family visits. When the doors opened, the foyer was quiet. They had left a mess of hanger wire and discarded shoe boxes. I stepped over a forgotten Gucci scarf lying on the marble like a dead snake. I didn't pick it up. I wasn't the janitor of their lives anymore. This space was mine now, cleansed by their absence. I walked to the floor, to ceiling windows overlooking the city. For decades, I had treated my life like a performance for an audience that booed every scene. I thought their validation was the currency of love. I realize now that the ledger had never been about love. It was about leverage. By taking back the assets, I hadn't just balanced the books. I had closed the account entirely. The emotional orphan the dean spoke of wasn't a tragedy. It was a liberation. I was finally debt-free. A vibration in my pocket broke the stillness. It wasn't a text from them. Those were blocked. But a LinkedIn notification. Troy requested to connect. The audacity was almost impressive. He was already trying to pivot, to network with the brother he had mocked hours ago. He probably wanted to pitch a collaboration. I stared at the request, remembering the graduation photo that started this war. I didn't feel angry. I felt nothing at all. I hit ignore and slipped the phone back into my pocket. The sun began to dip below the skyline, painting the glass towers in amber light. I poured a glass of water from the kitchen tap, drinking it from a crystal tumbler. My mother used to forbid me from touching. The water tasted the same as it did in my studio apartment, but the context had shifted. I wasn't hiding anymore. I didn't need a fortress of solitude or a secret bank account. I could exist openly in my own success without fear of theft. I walked out onto the balcony, the wind tugging at my suit jacket. Below me, the city moved in a chaotic rhythm of lights and noise, unaware of the domestic empire that had just fallen 20 stories up. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the cool evening air. I had spent my life screaming for attention in a room full of deaf people. I was done shouting. The best revenge isn't noise. It isn't a speech or a lawsuit. It is silence and success.